Hello, I am back with starting at page 19 for Anne Frank. Let's go. Alright, page 19. Friday, July 10th, 1942. Dear Kitty, I expect I have thoroughly bored you with my long-winded descriptions of our dwelling, but still I think you should know where we've landed. But to continue my story, you see, I'm not finished yet. When we arrived at the Prinsengracht, Miep took us quickly upstairs and into the secret annex. She closed the door behind us and we were alone. Margot was already waiting for us, having come much faster on her bicycle. Our living room and all our other rooms were chock full of rubbish, indescribably so. All the cardboard boxes which had been sent to the office in the previous months lay piled on the floor and the beds. The little room was filled up to the ceiling with bedclothes. We had to start clearing up immediately. If we wished to sleep in decent beds that night, Mummy and Margot were not in a fit state to take part. They were tired and lay down on their beds. They were miserable and lots more besides. Did that make too much sense to me? Let me see. We had to start clearing up immediately if we wished to sleep in decent beds that night. Mummy and Margot were not in a fit state to take part. They were tired and lay down on their beds. They were miserable and lots more besides. But the two clearer-ups of the family, Daddy and myself, wanted to start at once. The whole day long, we unpacked boxes, filled cupboards, hammered and tidied until we were dead beat. We sank into clean beds that night. We hadn't had a bit of anything warm the whole day, but we didn't care. Mummy and Margot were too tired and keyed up to eat, and Daddy and I were too busy. On Tuesday morning, we went on where we left off the day before. Ellie and Miep collected our rations for us. Daddy improved the poor blackout. We scrubbed the kitchen floor and were on the go the whole day long again. I hardly had time to think about the great change in my life until Wednesday. Then I had a chance, for the first time since our arrival, to tell you all about it, and at the same time to realize myself what had actually happened to me and what was still going to happen. Yours, Anne. Saturday, July 11th, 1942. Dear Kitty, Daddy, Mummy, and Margot can't get used to the sound of the Westorian clock yet, which tells us the time every quarter of an hour. I can. I loved it from the start, and especially in the night, it's like a faithful friend. I expect you will be interested. I expect you will be interested to hear what it feels like to disappear. Well, all I can say is that I don't know myself yet. I don't think I shall ever feel really at home in this house, but that does not mean that I loathe it here. It is more like being on vacation in a very peculiar boarding house. Rather a mad idea, perhaps, but that is how it strikes me. The secret annex is an ideal hiding place. Although it leans to one side and is damp, you never find such a comfortable hiding place anywhere in Amsterdam. No, perhaps not even in the whole of Holland. Our little room looked very bare at first with nothing on the walls, but thanks to Daddy, who had brought my film star collection and postcards on beforehand, and with the aid of paste pot and brush, I have transformed the walls into one gigantic picture. This makes it look much more cheerful, and when the Van Dams come, we'll get some wood from the attic and make a few little cupboards for the walls and other odds and ends to make it look more lively. Margot and Mummy are a little better now. Mummy felt well enough to cook some soup for the first time yesterday, but then forgot all about it while she was downstairs talking. So the peas were burned to a cinder and utterly refused to leave the pan. Mr. Kufius has brought me a book called Young People's Annual. The four of us went to the private office yesterday evening and turned on the radio. I was so terribly frightened that someone might hear it that I simply begged Daddy to come upstairs with me. Mummy understood how I felt and came too. We are very nervous in other ways too, that the neighbors might hear us or see something going on. We made curtains straight away on the first day. Really, one can hardly call them curtains. They are just light, loose strips of material, all different shapes, quality, and pattern, which Daddy and I sewed together in a most unprofessional way. These works of art are fixed in position with drawing pins, not to come down until we emerge from here. There are some large business premises on the right of us, and on the left a furniture workshop. There is no one there after working hours, but even so, sounds could travel through the walls. We have forbidden Margot to cough at night, although she has a bad cold, and make her swallow large doses of codeine. I'm looking for Tuesday when the Van Dams arrive. I'm looking for Tuesday. I'm looking for Tuesday. I'm looking forward to Tuesday, maybe? I'm looking for Tuesday when the Van Dans arrive. It will be much more fun and not so quiet. It is silence that frightens me so in the evenings and at night. I wish, like anything, that one of our protectors could sleep here at night. I can't tell you how oppressive it is never to be able to go outdoors. Also, I'm very afraid that we shall be discovered and be shot. That is not exactly a pleasant prospect. We have to whisper and tread lightly during the day. Otherwise, the people in the warehouse might hear us. Someone is calling me. Yours, Anne. Man, I don't think I've ever read this book. Alright. Friday, August 14, 1942. Dear Kitty, I have deserted you for a whole month. But honestly, there is so little news here that I can't find amusing things to tell you every day. The Van Dans arrived on July 13th. We thought they were coming on the 14th, but between the 13th and 16th of July, the Germans called up people right and left, which created more and more unrest. So they played for safety. Better a day too early than a day too late. At 9:30 in the morning, we were still having breakfast. Peter arrived. The Van Dans son, not 16 yet, a rather soft, shy, gawky youth. Can't expect much from his company. He brought his cat, Mooshy, with him. Mr. and Mrs. Van Dans arrived half an hour later, and to our great amusement, she had a large potty in her hat box. I don't feel at home anywhere without my chamber, she declared, so it was the first thing to find its permanent resting place under her divan. Mr. Van Dans did not bring his, but carried a folding tea table under his arm. From that day they arrived, we all had meals cozily together, and after 3 days it was just as if we were one large family. Naturally, the Van Dans were able to tell us a lot about the extra week they had spent in the inhabited world. Among other things, we were very interested to hear what happened to our house and to Mr. Gutschmidt. Mr. Van Dans told us. Mr. Gutschmidt phoned at 9 o'clock on Monday morning and asked if I could come around. I went immediately and found G. In a state of great agitation, he let me read a letter that the Franks had left behind, and wanted to take the cat to the neighbors as indicated in the letter, which pleased me. Mr. G was afraid that the house would be searched, so we went through all the rooms, tidied up a bit, and cleared away the breakfast things. Suddenly, I discovered a writing pad on Mrs. Frank's desk with an address and manuscript written on it. Although I knew that it was done on purpose, I pretended to be very surprised and shocked and urged Mr. G to tear up this unfortunate little piece of paper without delay. I went on pretending that I knew nothing of your disappearance all the time, but after seeing the paper, I got a brainwave. Mr. Gutschmidt, I said, it suddenly dawns on me what this address may refer to. Now it all comes back to me. A high-ranking officer was in the office about 6 months ago. He appeared to be very friendly with Mr. Frank and offered to help him, should the need arise. He was stationed in Maastricht. I think he must have kept his word and somehow or other managed to get them into Belgium and then on to Switzerland. I should tell this to any friends who may inquire. Don't, of course, mention Maastricht. With these words I left the house. Most of your friends know already, because I've been told myself several times by different people. We were highly amused at the story, and when Mr. Van Dans gave us further details, laughed still more at the way people can let their imagination run away with them. One family had seen the pair of us pass on bicycles very early in the morning, and another lady knew quite definitely that we were fetched by a military car in the middle of the night. Yours, Anne. Friday, August 21st, 1942. Dear Kitty, the entrance to our hiding place has now been properly concealed. Mr. Kriller thought it would be better to put a cupboard in front of our door, because a lot of houses are being searched for hidden bicycles. But of course it had to be a movable cupboard that can open like a door. Mr. Voster made the whole thing. We had already let him into the secret, and he couldn't do enough to help. If we want to go downstairs, we have to first bend down and then jump, because the step has gone. The first 3 days we were all going about the masses of lumps on our foreheads, because we all knocked ourselves against the low doorway. Now we have nailed a cloth filled with wood wool against the top of the door. Let's see if that helps. I'm not working much at the present. I'm giving myself holidays until September. Then Daddy is going to give me lessons. It's shocking how much I've forgotten already. There is a little change in our life here. Mr. Van Dans and I usually manage to upset each other. It's just the opposite with Margot, whom he likes very much. Mummy sometimes treats me just like a baby, which I can't bear. Otherwise, things are going better. I still don't like Peter anymore. He is so boring. He flops lazily on his bed half the time, does a bit of carpentry, and then goes back for another snooze. What a fool. It is lovely weather, and in spite of everything, we make the most we can of it by lying on a camp bed in the attic, where the sun shines through an open window. Yours, Anne. Wednesday, September 2nd, 1942. Dear Kitty, Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan had a terrible quarrel. I've never seen anything quite like it before. Mummy and Daddy would never dream of shouting at each other. The cause was so trivial that the whole thing was a pure waste of breath, but still everyone to his own liking. Naturally, it was very unpleasant for Peter, who has to stand by. No one takes him seriously. He is so frightfully touché and lazy. Yesterday he was badly upset because he found that his tongue was blue instead of red. This unusual phenomenon of nature disappeared just as quickly as it had come. Today he is going about with a scarf on, and he has a stiff neck. In addition, my lord complains of lumbago. Pains around the heart, kidneys, and lungs are not unusual either. He is a real hypochondriac. That's the word for such people, isn't it? It is not all honey between Mummy and Mrs. Van Daan. There are plenty of causes for unpleasantness. To give a small example, I will tell you that Mrs. Van Daan has taken all 3 of her sheets out of the common linen cupboard. She takes it for granted that Mummy's sheets will do for all of us. It will be a nasty surprise for her when she finds that Mummy has followed her good example. Although she is thoroughly piqued that her dinner service and not ours is in use, she is always trying to find out where we actually put our plates. They are closer than she thinks. They are in a cardboard box behind a lot of junk in the attic. Our plates are ungettable as long as we are here, and a good thing, too. I always have bad luck. I smashed one of Mrs. Van Daan's soup plates into 1,000 pieces yesterday. Oh, she cried angrily. Couldn't you be careful for once? That's the last one I've got. Mr. Van Daan is all sugar to me nowadays. Long may it last. Mummy gave me another frightful sermon this morning. I can't bear them. Our ideas are completely opposite. Daddy is a darling, although he can sometimes be angry with me for 5 minutes on end. Last week we had a little interruption in our monotonous life. It was over a book about women and Peter. First, I must tell you that Margot and Peter are allowed to read nearly all the books that Mr. Kufius lends us, but the grown-ups held back this particular book on the subject of women. Peter's curiosity was aroused at once. What was it the 2 of them were not allowed to read in this book? He got hold of the book on the sly while his mother was downstairs talking, and disappeared with his booty to the attic. All went well for a few days. His mother knew what he was doing, but didn't tell tales until Father found out. He was very angry, took the book away, and thought that would finish the whole business. However, he had not allowed for his son's curiosity, which waxed rather than waned because of his father's attitude. Peter, determined to finish it, thought of a way to get a hold of this enthralling book. In the meantime, Mrs. Van Daan had asked Mummy what she thought about it all. Mummy thought this particular book was not suitable for Margot, but she saw no harm in letting her read most books. There is a great difference, Mrs. Van Daan, said Mummy, between Margot and Peter. In the first place, Margot is a girl, and girls are always more grown-up than boys. Secondly, Margot has read quite a lot of serious books, and does not go in search of things that are forbidden her. And thirdly, Margot is far more developed and intelligent, shown by the fact of her being in the 4th form at school. Mrs. Van Daan agreed, but still thought it was wrong in principle to let children read books which were written for grown-ups. In the meantime, Peter had found a time of the day where no one bothered him or the book. No one bothered about him or the book. 7:30 in the evening. Then everyone was in the private office listening to the radio. That was when he took his treasure to the attic again. He should have been downstairs again by 8:30, but because the book was so thrilling, he forgot the time and was just coming downstairs as Father came into the room. You can imagine the consequences. His father came into the room. With a slap and a snatch, the book lay on the table and Peter was in the attic. That's how matters stood as we sat down to the table. Peter stayed upstairs, no one bothered about him, and he had to go to bed without any supper. We went on with meal, chattering gaily, when suddenly we heard a piercing whistle. We all stopped eating and looked with pale, changed faces from one to another. Then we heard Peter's voice calling down the chimney. I say, "I'm not coming down anyway." Mr. Van Dam sprang to his feet. His napkin fell to the floor, and scarlet in the face he shouted. Excuse me, I have to sneeze. Okay, sorry I sneezed and I put it down for just a second. Literally 2 minutes. Okay. Alright. And I forgot where I was. Alright, let's get back here. Okay. We went on with the meal, chattering gaily, when suddenly we heard a piercing whistle. We all stopped eating and looked with pale, changed faces from one to another. Then we heard Peter's voice calling down the chimney. I say, "I'm not coming down anyway." Mr. Van Dam sprang to his feet. His napkin fell to the floor, and scarlet in the face he shouted, "I've had enough of this." Daddy took his arm, afraid of what might happen, and the two men went together to the attic. After a good deal of resistance and stamping, Peter landed up in his room and the door closed, and we went on eating. Mrs. Van Dam wanted to save one slice of bread for the dear boy, but his father stood firm. If he doesn't apologize soon, he will have to sleep in the attic. Loud protest from the rest of us, as we thought missing supper was quite enough punishment. Besides, Peter might catch cold and we couldn't call a doctor. Peter did not apologize. He was already in the attic. Mr. Van Dam did nothing more about it, but I noticed the next morning that Peter's bed had been slept in. Peter was back in the attic at 7 o'clock, but Daddy managed with a few friendly words to persuade him to come down again. Sour faces and obstinate silences for 3 days, and then everything went smoothly once again. Yours, Anne. Monday, September 21st, 1942. Dear Kitty, today I'm going to tell you our general news. Mrs. Van Dam is unbearable. I get nothing but blow-ups from her for my continuous chatter. She is always pestering us in some way or other. This is the latest. She doesn't want to wash up the pans. If there is a fragment left, instead of putting it into a glass dish, as we've always done until now, she leaves it in the pan to go bad. After the next meal, Margot sometimes has had about 7 pans to wash up, and then Madame says, well, Margot, you have a lot to do. I'm busy with Daddy working out his family tree. As we go along, he tells me little bits about everyone. It's terribly interesting. Mr. Kufius brings us a few special books for me every other week. I'm thrilled with the Jupe Ted Hall series. I've enjoyed the whole of Sissy Van Marksveld very much. And I've read Ian Somersetide 4 times, and I still laugh about some of the ludicrous situations that arise. Term time has begun again. I'm simply working hard at my French and managed to pump in 5 irregular verbs per day. Peter sighs and groans over his English. A few school books have just arrived, but we have a good stock of exercise books, pencils, rubbers, and labels, and I brought these with me. I sometimes listen to the Dutch news from London. Heard Prince Bernhard recently. He said that Princess Juliana is expecting a baby about next January. I think it is lovely. It surprises the others that I should be so keen on the royal family. I was being discussed and they decided that I'm not completely stupid after all, which had the effect of making me work extra hard the next day. I certainly don't want to still be in the first form when I'm 14 or 15. Also, the fact that I'm hardly allowed to read any decent books was mentioned. Mummy is reading Juan in Connected now, which I'm not allowed. Margot is. First, I must be more developed, like my talented sister. Then we talk about my ignorance of philosophy and psychology, about which I know nothing. Perhaps by next year I shall be wiser. I looked at these difficult words quickly in Conan. I have just woken up to the disturbing fact that I have 1 long-sleeve dress and 3 cardigans for the winter. I have received permission from Daddy to knit a jumper of white sheep's wool. It's not very nice wool, but as long as it's warm, that's all that matters. We have some clothes deposited with friends, but unfortunately we should not see them until after the war. That is, if they are still there then. I had just written something about Mrs. Van Dam when in she came. Slap! I closed the book. Hey, Anne, can't I just have a look? I'm afraid not. Just the last page, then? Nope, I'm sorry. Naturally, it gave me a frightful shock, because there was an unflattering description of her on this particular page. Yours, Anne. Friday, September 25th, 1942. Dear Kitty, yesterday evening I went upstairs and visited the Van Dans. I do so occasionally to have a chat. Sometimes it can be quite fun. Then we have some moth biscuits. The biscuit tin is kept in the wardrobe that is full of mothballs, and drink lemonade. We talked about Peter. I told him how Peter often strokes my cheek, and that I wished he wouldn't, as I don't like being pawed by boys. In a typical way parents have, they asked if I couldn't get fond of Peter, because he certainly liked me very much. I thought, oh dear, and said, oh no, imagine it. I did say that I thought Peter was rather awkward, but that it was probably shyness, as many boys who haven't had much to do with girls are like that. I must say that the refuge committee of the secret annex, male section, is very ingenious. I'll tell you what they've done now to get news of us through to Mr. Van Dijk, Travi's chief representative, and a friend who has surreptitiously hidden some of our things for us. They typed a letter to a chemist in South Zealand, who does business with our firm, in such a way that he has had to send the enclosed reply back in the addressed envelope. Daddy addressed the envelope to the office. When this envelope arrives from Zealand, the enclosed letter is taken out and is replaced by a message in Daddy's handwriting as a sign of life. Like this, Van Dijk won't be suspicious when he reads the note. They specifically chose Zealand because it is so close to Belgium, and the letter could have easily been smuggled over the border. In addition, no one is allowed into Zealand without a special permit, so if they thought we were there, he couldn't try and go look us up. Yours, Anne. Sunday, September 27, 1942. Dear Kitty, just had a big bust-up with Mummy for the umpteenth time. We simply don't get on together these days, and Margot and I don't hit it off too well either. As a rule, we don't go in for such outbursts, as this is our family. Still, it's by no means always pleasant for me. Margot's and Mummy's natures are completely strange to me. I can understand my friends better than my own mother. Too bad. We often discuss post-war problems. For example, how one ought to address servants. Mrs. Van Daan had another tantrum. She is terribly moody. She keeps hiding more of her private belongings. Mummy ought to answer each Van Daan disappearance with a frank disappearance. How some people do adore bringing up other people's children in addition to their own. The Van Daans are that kind. Margot doesn't need it. She is such a goody-goody, perfection itself, but I seem to have enough mischief in me for the two of us put together. You should hear us at mealtimes, with reprimands and cheeky answers flying to and fro. Mummy and Daddy always defend me stoutly. I'd have to give up if it weren't for them. Although they do tell me that I mustn't talk so much, and that I must be more retiring and not poke my nose into everything. Still, I seem doomed to failure. If Daddy wasn't so patient, I'd be afraid I was going to turn out to be a terrific disappointment to my parents, and they are pretty lenient with me. If I take a small helping of some vegetable I detest, and I make up with potatoes, the Van Daans, and Marroer in particular, can't get over it. That any child should be so spoiled. Come along, Anne. Have a few more vegetables, she says, straight away. No, thank you, Miss Van Daan, I answer. I have plenty of potatoes. Vegetables are good for you. Your mother says so, too. Have a few more, she says, pressing them on me until Daddy comes to my rescue. Then we have from Mrs. Van Daan. You ought to have been in our home. We were properly brought up. It's a syrup that Anne's so frightfully spoiled. I wouldn't put up with it if Anne were my daughter. These are always her first and last words, if Anne were my daughter. Thank heavens I'm not. But to come back to the upbringing business, there was a deadly silence after Mrs. Van Daan had finished speaking yesterday. Then Daddy said, I think Anne is extremely well brought up. She has learned one thing anyway, and that is to make no reply to your long sermons. As to the vegetables, look at your own plate. Mrs. Van Daan was beaten, well and truly beaten. She had taken a minute minute helping of vegetables herself. But she is not spoiled. Oh, no. Too many vegetables in the evening make her constipated. Why on earth doesn't she keep her mouth shut about me? Then she wouldn't need to make such feeble excuses. It's gorgeous the way Mrs. Van Daan blushes. I don't, and that's just what she hates. Yours, Anne. Monday, September 28, 1942. Dear Kitty, I had to stop yesterday, long before I'd finished. I just must tell you about another quarrel, but before I start on that, something else. Why do grown-ups quarrel so easily? So much and over the most idiotic things? Up till now, I thought that... You want to come up here, Gordies? Come on, you want to sit with Mama? Come on, up. Come on. No? Gigi, you want to come up here? Sorry, my little pup. Little baby girl. Okay, up until now, I thought that only children squabbled, and that wore off as you grew up. Of course, there is sometimes a real reason for a quarrel, but that is just plain bickering. This is just plain bickering. I suppose I should get used to it, but I can't, nor do I think I shall, as long as I am the subject of nearly every discussion. They use the word discussion instead of quarrel. Nothing, I repeat, nothing about me is right. My general appearance, my character, my manners are discussed from A to Z. I am expected, by order, to simply swallow all the harsh words and shouts in silence, and I am not used to this. In fact, I can't. I'm not going to take all these insults lying down. I'll show them that Anne Frank wasn't born yesterday. Then they'll be surprised, and perhaps they'll keep their mouths shut when I let them see that I'm going to start educating them. Shall I take up that attitude? Plain barbarism. I'm simply amazed again and again over the awful manners, and especially stupidity. Mrs. Van Dan's. But as soon as I get used to this, and it won't be long, then I'll give them some of their own back, and no half measures. Then they'll change their tune. Am I really so bad-mannered, conceited, headstrong, pushing, stupid, lazy, etc., etc., as they all say? Oh, of course not. I have my faults just like anyone else. I know that. But they thoroughly exaggerate everything. Kitty, if only you knew how I sometimes boil under so many jibes and jeers, and I don't know how long I shall be able to stifle my rage. I shall just blow up one day. Still, no more of this. I bored you long enough with all these quarrels. But I simply must tell you of one highly interesting discussion at table. Somehow or other, we got onto the subject of Pims, Daddy's nickname, extreme modesty. Even the most stupid people have to admit this about Daddy. Suddenly, Mrs. Van Daan says, I too have an unassuming nature, more so than my husband. Did you ever? This sentence in itself shows quite clearly how thoroughly forward and pushing she is. Mrs. Van Daan thought he ought to give an explanation regarding the reference to himself. Want to get up here? Come on. Up, up, up. Okay, I gotta do this, Gigi, and then I'll get them to himself. I don't wish to be modest. In my experience, it does not pay. Then to me, take my advice, Anne. Don't be too unassuming. It doesn't get you anywhere. Mummy agreed with this too, but Mrs. Van Daan had to add, as always, her ideas on the subject. Her next remark was addressed to Mummy and Daddy. You have a strange outlook on life. Fancy saying such a thing to Anne. It was very different when I was young, and I feel that it still is, except in your modern home. This was a direct hit at the way Mummy brings up her daughters. Mrs. Van Daan was scarlet by this time, Mummy calm and cool as a cucumber. People who blush get so hot and excited, it is quite a handicap in such a situation. Mummy, still entirely unruffled, but anxious to close the conversation as soon as possible, thought for a second, and then said, I find too, Mrs. Van Daan, that one gets on better in life if one is not over-modest. My husband, now, and Margot, and Peter are exceptionally modest, whereas your husband, and you and I, though not exactly the opposite, don't allow ourselves to be completely pushed to one side. What are you upset at? Mrs. Van... That's Gigi. Meet Gigi. Gigi! Mrs. Van Daan. But Mrs. Frank, I don't understand you. I'm so very modest and retiring. How can you think of calling me anything else? Let me pause this for a sec. Mummy, I did not say you were exactly forward, but no one could say you had a retiring disposition, Mrs. Van Daan. Let us get this matter cleared up once and for all. I'd like to know in what way I am pushing. I know one thing. If I didn't look after myself, I'd be starving. This absurd remark is... I can hear my dog right there doing something. This absurd remark in self-defense just made Mummy rock with laughter. That irritated Mrs. Van Daan, who added a string of German, Dutch-German expressions. until she became completely tongue-tied. Then she rose from her chair and was about to leave the room. Suddenly, her eye fell on me. You should have seen her. Unfortunately, at the very moment that she turned around, I was shaking my head sorrowfully. Not on purpose, but quite involuntarily, for I had been following the whole conversation so closely. Mrs. Van Daan turned around and began to reel off a lot of harsh German comment and ill-mannered, just like a coarse, red-faced fishwife. It was a marvelous sight. If I could draw, I'd have liked to catch her like this. It was a scream. Such a stupid, foolish little person. Anyway, I've learned one thing now. You only really get to know people when you've had a jolly good row with them. Then only can you judge their true characters. Yours, Anne. Alright, that's enough for now, guys. I'll talk to you guys later. I'll be back.